Professor Franklin Zimring. I teach at the University of California at Berkeley, and the subject of tonight's conversation is the crime decline in New York City between 1990 and 2010 and what it means for American crime control. The data on crime, the official story in New York, is sort of Ripley's Believe It or Not. The way in which I present it is not to talk about how big the drop is, but how much crime is left of 1990 levels rather. What you've got now is less than a fifth of the homicide rate that you had in 1990. You have 18% of the homicide rate per 100,000 you had then. You have 16% of the robbery rate. You have 6% in 2009 of the auto theft rate in 1990. The problem, of course, with these statistics is the police have a vested interest in looking good, and they're the official scorekeepers. But on three different crime categories, homicide and auto theft, the world record holder, and robbery, we had ways of checking independently. And every time we did, the police statistics passed with flying colors. So the biggest decline anybody's ever seen is by and large real. The bad news about any crime decline that includes the 1990s is that that was an era where crime dropped all over the United States, and by about 40%. And that drop, the one that happened everywhere over the period 1991 to 2000, has no particular causes that anybody can tie down. And it certainly had nothing to do with the New York police, because there weren't major changes on a nationwide basis in policing to go with the big changes that took place in New York. So if everybody's crime dropped 40%, that much of New York's crime drop probably had nothing to do with anything special here. But New York's drop lasted twice as long, it's still going, and it was twice as big. And if you then ask, how much of that New York difference is attributable to the police? The answer is most of it. Our best estimates suggest that there are 3 crimes where the police all by themselves have reduced crime by about 1/3 in the 20 years after 1990. And those turn out to be exactly the 3 crimes that you'd expect street policing to have its largest impact with. Burglary, because the burglar's got to find you through the streets. Auto theft, which is quintessentially a street crime. And robbery. Those 3 go down 31% more than other places, 34% more for robbery, and 34% more for burglary. Those are police numbers. Some of the techniques that the New York City police used have been validated in other places in a rigorous fashion. We know that hot spots worked. We know that the destruction of public drug markets probably substantially reduced drug violence. Then there are the big unknowns. It's not positively certain that CompStat adds a tremendous amount of value. If I had to bet, I'd bet it does. It is not positively certain that the police gun programs work because they haven't been rigorously evaluated in New York. They have been evaluated in other cities, but those aren't the ones that the police were using here. But the biggest unknown has to do with the stop and frisk aggressiveness. The New York City Police Department is one of the most aggressive police departments we've ever seen. And the big question, that's part and parcel of a lot of other things. That's part of hotspots, that's part of destruction of drug markets. But the question is, does getting aggressive, does making 600,000 stops add value to these techniques? And the answer is a great big, we don't know. One important lesson is obviously that street policing is an awful lot more of a crime fighter than anybody ever thought. It was considered a myth in social science 25 years ago that police were actually crime prevention. It's not a myth anymore. But the biggest demonstrations from New York come from the incredible variability of the crime rate. The population outside of Manhattan hasn't changed at all, and yet the crime rate is down by more than 80%. So let me ask the question, where did all the criminals go? They didn't move to New Jersey. They didn't get a lot older. They did come home from prison a lot more than they were sent up to prison. We have 20,000 more formerly active criminals on the streets in New York City than there were in 1997. And crime's way down because the crime rates of people who have serious criminal records are highly variable. So what New York has proved is that you can have very effective crime control without mass incarceration. And let's talk about some of the implications of that. If New York City, which actually dropped its level of jailing and imprisonment by about 11,000 between 1990 and 2009, if instead they'd followed the US national pattern and increased their rate by 65%, there would be 58,000 more people behind bars from this city in the prisons and the jails than there are now. Now, locking up 58,000 people would pay for an expanded police force 2 times over. It also is a much better way to run a city for poor and minority populations. And the thing which I find remarkable is that the one place in the United States of any size that has decarcerated over the last 20 years has had the greatest crime-fighting success, and nobody's noticed. The police department did destroy public drug markets. They did end drug violence by and large. Drug killings by SHR estimates are down more than 90%. Did they eliminate illegal drug use? Oh boy, didn't they. We have a lot of ways of measuring cocaine and heroin use, and by most of those measures, it's been pretty stable. We look at drug overdose deaths, we look at hospital admissions, we look at emergency room mentions, we look at hospital treatment releases. They're all stable to slightly up. There was a short dip in cocaine use among younger populations in the late 1990s, but that seems to have crept back up. So what we found out is that we can reduce the harms that make the public frightened. We can win the war on drug violence without winning the war on drugs. If we'd known that 25 years ago in this country, perhaps we could have saved a couple of 100,000 of imprisonments. And it was a conservative, sort of right-wing police department which practiced magnificently and demonstrated the value of harm reduction as opposed to reducing the intake of drugs at all costs as a way of making the public not only much safer, but feeling much safer.